What are we called? Tarot Beyond Tradition. That's
Tarot Beyond Tradition. Yep.
It's always good when you can't remember the name of what you're doing. Hey folks, welcome back. As you can see, we're back with another episode of Tarot Beyond Tradition, and it is with myself, Tegan of Animals and Arcana, and the lovely Dawn.
Hello.
Dawn will be linked below, as this is on my channel, and you'll be able to find Dawn over on her various platforms and places because she is a chronic
ridiculous
chronic creator. And yeah, there's just a lot to find out. I would still be very surprised if people were here and didn't know who you were, but constant plug just in case.
Oh, thank you.
So today we're here doing animal deck discussions, which is probably a bit more of a niche, I guess, that I am known for, which is why we'll do the fandom stuff over on yours, because I feel like whilst we share niches, the gaming one is definitely more of a world that you're in a larger way, right? And the animal, me. But I'm actually really excited to hear your standpoint on the animal stuff today, so I will be pushing it to say all of the things and some of the challenges as well, right?
Yeah, definitely challenges in animal decks for me, but it's interesting because they are, when you're thinking about tarot outside of tradition, having animals in place of the cards, that's like non-traditional.
So non-traditional, and I feel like we've got a good variation of examples as well, because I feel like the ways that they show up non-traditionally sort of become like twofold, threefold, and so on, depending on what type of approach the person's taken as well, like how anthropomorphic it is. There's some animal decks that are very still, I think is the word I use, like where there's not a lot going on, just the animal. And then there's the ones that are a lot more scenic and storytelling still.
It's kind of like active animals versus passive animals.
Yes, that's a great description.
Does that change how that probably changes how you interpret the card, right? Whether it's sitting there or it's doing something, I would imagine. I am not well versed in animal decks. I have a few, more than I thought I did. I was like, I just have this one and this one. And Tegan's like, no.
Do you have any initial thoughts, I suppose, or things off of the bat before we sort of get into the like deck to deck discussion and where it takes us? Because I suppose I know that there's some challenges there for you, but I don't know how many people are sort of, if people have watched your channel for long enough, they should know, but whether they do know or not, or whether you've got any other thoughts about like what you do or don't like, or what does and doesn't work for you.
Yeah, I think so animal decks, they're challenging for me, and I have a tendency to bring an animal deck in, try it, it doesn't work, I rehome it, and then I have second thoughts about it. There's a couple of decks here that I've done that with, or ones that I'm like, I'm not going to like it. I get it. And I think I'm not going to like it. And then I do. But the biggest challenge for me with animal decks, I think, is that if the deck itself requires me to know about the animal in order to work with the interpretation of the card, it's not going to work for me, because I know nothing about animals beyond very, very basic stuff, or what I've learned in your animal gnosis over the last few years. But outside of that, like show me an animal and I'll be like, okay, well, I think maybe this is what that means. But that's just me probably pulling on like, I don't know, childhood stuff or things like that, or what I remember like at the zoo, because I've never done like any sort of study into animals. So if it's got animals on it, but the scene is still traditional enough, which is funny when we're talking about Tarot Beyond Tradition, but if it's an animal in a traditional enough scene that I can go, okay, it's basically just taking the place of a human. Yeah. It's not meant to layer in anything about the animal itself. Then it's easier for me to work with, because it's almost like the animal doesn't matter at that point. It's just like a cute animal versus a person, which actually I prefer, because I don't really like people in my deck. It's not my favorite. If I'm going to have something in my deck, I like the cute animal thing in my deck, but if it requires me to have knowledge of that animal in order to make any sort of use of it, then it's not going to work for me because, like, let's be honest, I'm not going to take the time to go find out about that animal, most likely, unless it's something that has been reoccurring for me. Like I had a bee thing last year, and this year I have a butterfly thing. So I have done. But it's taken months of like butterfly imagery coming up for me me to even go, oh, wait, is that a thing? Maybe that's a thing. I keep seeing butterflies. So it's really interesting. And there's been a few that I've had that I think it's more of that. Maybe it's more of that still sort of like we were talking about. Yeah. The still, like the photography deck. I know the one that you have that I have looked at that deck so many times. For one, it's out of print and I'm like, I'm not paying that for it. But because I don't know anything about the animal, I feel like I would need to rely on a guidebook, and we know how I feel about that. That just irritates me to no end. And otherwise, there's no connection there for me. And I think that for me is the biggest challenge with animal decks is if I have to know about the animal in order for the card to have some sort of meaning, I'm not going to use it. I'm just not. That sounds terrible. It's too much work for me. But, if you're in the midst of a reading and you're trying to get the information and you're trying to work with the message coming through, having to stop and go deep research a topic, you don't always have, the time or the mental space to really do all of that.
There's a lot of context to be had there as well, isn't there? Like, it's not your thing, like, it's my thing. And also, I don't have to stop every time I see an animal because I'd already done so many animal studies before I got to it. So, yeah, the idea of, like, for me, that would be a plant deck. And it's taken me ages to find plant decks I like, especially.
I have the same problem with plant decks. We should talk about that too at some point.
Yeah, I don't want to do a tarot reading for myself and stop every 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And research. Yeah. I don't think that sounds bad at all. I'd be like, One of the reasons why years ago, actually, I did a video like trying to help people find the tarot deck for them. The cat is going to get in shot again. She's just decided it's an animal video, so I'm here.
Well, I mean, it's an animal video. We're on your channel. I mean, of course. She's like, this is my home.
Yeah. She's like, I should be in this. I love that people get excited about the animal gnosis stuff that I offer. I also don't expect people to have the same retention because I have terrible retention now, especially with like all of the chronic conditions and stuff. It's just animals sort of sit in that special interest and an interest from before my memory went like it did.
Right.
And so that's why I think, like you said, the more storytelling or very scenic displays where basically the animal is just a body, like without making that sound really dehumanizing, it could be anything, couldn't it? Like those decks where it could be a person, it could be an animal, it could be a stick figure, as it just is a replacement for that scene. I feel like they're very accessible decks.
I was just say, do you think that that's kind of the benefit though to an animal deck? Because if you think about when we talk about like diversity in decks and stuff like that, that's if you're putting animals in place of people, you've now taken that piece of the puzzle out.
Yeah.
So in that term, maybe it's a good thing, but also then what do you do when you have people like me that like, well, okay, I see myself in the tarot. So how am I supposed to see myself as a penguin?
Yeah.
Or, a raven or whatever. I mean, I can see, I say that raven, I now have associations with. So as you're doing things, then that kind of stuff kind of trickles in. But like I got nothing on a penguin, man. Nothing.
You're like, I see these penguins.
But I think that's interesting. Do you think that there's like, in your opinion, what would the benefits, like the biggest benefit versus the drawback of working with an animal deck?
Years ago, there was a discussion about how obviously it meant that we weren't just seeing thin white people constantly, but then sort of was perhaps being used as a fallback to avoid just putting different body shapes and skin colors and stuff like that in decks, which is not, one is not for me a like for like replacement.
Right.
So I feel like if people want to see themselves in a deck, then an animal deck is that's probably one of its biggest downfalls. You're just not going to see yourself in it unless you're like me and can literally relate to every animal.
Relate to the animals, yeah.
Yeah, I think its strongest point is that for a lot of people, especially, it's something that I see come up a lot in therapy, not just animal lovers just in general, but people, and obviously not all, but some people who have trauma, especially at a young age, they tend to bond with animals and have a lot more familiarity and connection with them. And whilst we could argue that obviously there's like a humanizing going on there, but for a lot of people, I feel like that's a lot more familiar and relational. And I feel like that taps into quite a pivotal point for people that have not had such nourishing, safe human relationships. And so it makes tarot a safe space for them again. I still think you can work with those things as well. But in terms of like comfort, especially when people are being introduced to tarot, I feel like there's nothing better than someone having a tarot that they can positively relate with to start off with. So the relationship's like healthy and nourishing from the get-go.
Such a good point.
I speak to person after person after person who has those relationships with animals and finds themselves in therapy wanting to build those relationships with people. So I think it's like a point in for a lot of people, including myself when I was younger. Had I have started out with I did have a people-ish tarot, but I also had the medicine cards oracle. Had someone given me a people oracle, I'm pretty sure I would not have been interested, to be honest. It was the fact that like animals had a message for me, because I was very done with people very early on. So yeah, I think
relate to that.
That's I think that's probably one of the strongest points for people who have that. But again, I would argue that for most people, especially if they're coming into learning tarot, unless they have a special interest in like studying animals in more of like a zoology, behavioral facet, they're still going to need one of the decks that I would say are more like scenic storytelling. It's got that nuance. So it's just like you've changed the bodies in the deck to make them more connective for the person.
So what deck is that the one that you picked that you'd recommend? Somebody starting out, like if I didn't know anything about animals or tarot, or I wanted to work with tarot but use animals.
Perhaps not the mass market deck, actually. I think the one that is closest to that for me is the Heartwood.
Such a comfort deck.
Yeah, that feels to me the most like Peter Rabbit or Animals into the Farthing Woods or Farthing Wood Animals. I can never remember the title. Like those childhood things where you could either hear the animals talking in the show or they were like Peter Rabbit, they were more anthropomorphized. I feel like the way that they tell stories, so the mass market deck I've got is quite scenic, but it's still more in line with animal behavior, probably a little bit more, whereas in Heartwood there's just a tiny bit more of an element of fantasy for me. Does that make sense? It's like they are being animals in it technically, they are also exploring an abandoned house, and so there's that traversing into storytelling.
I love that deck.
Don't you? Yeah.
That one, I have them all from that series, but that one is my favorite, because that deck for me, when I am feeling like overwhelmed or the world feels really, really big, there's something very comforting about that deck that kind of reminds me that like it's okay if you sometimes feel like small or like you can't, or everything just feels very overwhelming. There's such a comfort in that deck of all these like little animals doing little animal things in a people world.
Yeah. It's so wholesome, isn't it? I feel like these tell the story best. Like we can see that the mouse is climbing off into the distance here. And with this one, we can see that the birds are sharing something together. So I feel like it's less about what birds these are. They're clearly found like a raspberry, and it looks like they're about to share the raspberry. I feel like there's a lot more power in that, right?
Yeah. That is an animal deck. That's the kind of animal deck that I can use because I don't feel like I need to know the animal in order to get the meaning and the message out of the card. Just love the whole vibe of it.
It's so cute, isn't it?
So cute and cozy. It's like, that is like an ultimate comfort deck.
It is. It's so clever, like the chess piece for the knight. We've got the horse, so it's still technically a horse, but also there's like for people who know the chess reference, then there's like a strategical, very physical, resourceful layer to that. So they're pulling on, I feel like, other parts of our world familiarity. We know what jars are for, we know what money's for, we know what, at least for each of us, what a candle means. So I feel like this one has the most human elements in it as well, which is that sort of crossover point for me. And then for someone like myself, I can then add on the other bit. This is a starling. Starlings are fantastic. We have a little nest above my parents' house, and they've nested there for like generations. There are obviously similar mass market decks. This one is still in print though, and whilst I will show a mass market deck, I feel like this one just does that storytelling in that fantasy human way just a little bit better than the one that I'm going to recommend as like a mass market go-to for accessibility reasons.
I think that one is so good because it's not just a reimagining of the traditional tarot with an animal in place of it. It's telling its own story, which is amazing.
It is a 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗃 myth deck, but it's not a clone of the traditional images. The hanged mouse isn't on a noose. And actually they're hanging in a whole different way as well. Like they're not hanging from something, they're hanging in something. By choice.
There's an intention in that card where not necessarily in the hanged man.
Yeah. Going back to one of the questions you said about some of the pitfalls of the animal decks, all animal decks, in my opinion, unless they're anthropomorphic and very, very scenic, again, active scenes, I think that people struggle with the cults. For me, the traditional tarot cults, whether that's whatever system, some of them feel very, it's just another person.
They're very passive.
Yeah. And in that sense, they're a lot harder to read. So then if you do that in an animal deck, again, Page of Wands, we've got a little deer. There's not much else going on here. For the people who don't know as much about animals, it might still get into that dicey territory. How do you find the cults in this one?
In that one, I don't think I have any struggles with that one in the courts, or with like the sister deck, the Oak, Ash, and Thorn. I think because they are, even though they're kind of a little bit more still, I still feel like there's movement, there's a scene, there's something happening.
Yeah,
it's not just like a guy sitting on a throne, right, and a king.
It's not just a photograph of an animal in a field either.
Right. There's something going on there. There's context around the animal, and I think that's really helpful in reading the courts.
Yeah, like I think those four, actually, in fairness to this deck, the four that I've just shown, they are quite different to each other,
and they all have a story, I think. Like, and that's the thing about that deck is each card contains its own story, but then there's also the overarching story of that deck, which is really cool. It feels like a storybook.
It does, and I think that's why I love it. And for me, it's the strongest of the tarot series by the creators. It feels much more immersive to me, and more developed, I guess. I'd
agree. That one's my go-to.
In your opinion, how non-traditional do you think this is for an animal tarot deck?
For an animal tarot, I would say that probably falls more non-traditional because it's leaning into more of the story, and I feel like every card just kind of steps just a little bit outside of what the norm. Like if you were to open up a book and look at keywords and go, this card means this, that I feel like that deck steps more outside of what we would normally see. It's all still there, but I feel like that story layer is really, really predominant in that deck, which to me makes it step outside a little bit more of the traditional.
It's interesting because a part of me feels like it's more traditional because it is storytelling, and so it helps the reader in one way. But then the other part, I would 100% agree that actually, if you got like traditional keywords, I think that this does its own thing. It fits it, but it's nuanced, and I think that it also relies a lot less on what I'm going to coin animal cliches. That if I said, tell me what animal they think of when I say the hanged man.
Well, I go to bat or possum. Both of those things flipped in my head.
Yeah, bat is on so many hanged men cards. There's nothing wrong with it. You can argue for it for sure, and there's a lot of reasons why it works, but it's like it's so frequent it becomes like a cliche. So it feels then in animal deck world it becomes traditional, if that makes sense. Like for me,
that makes sense. Yeah.
So this doesn't do that. It definitely goes its own way with the animal choices, and that's quite refreshing as someone who's very deep into what's usually on this card, what's usually on that card. So this is a hot recommendation from both of us then, yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like one of my favorite comfort decks. Like I said, that is my go-to deck when the world feels very big and scary. And let's face it, like nowadays the world's very big and scary. So there's something about that, the little moments captured in that deck, and the fact that it's not people when, you know, people's the big problem of the big scary world right now. So taking that element out of it, which I didn't think about until you said that at the beginning of the video, but yeah, that is absolutely true. When you just can't, like when I can't people anymore, that is when I will go to like animal decks and things like that, because I just can't people anymore.
Yeah, it's like a breath of fresh air, isn't it? It's like, right, okay, humanity is it's testing me. I love that it gives you little moments because you're the cozy little mouse. You're literally wondering.
Yeah. Which is amazing. I love that layer into the deck because it definitely influences how I work with it.
See, so you might not be able to become a penguin, but without realizing you have become a mouse.
I've become a mouse. I could probably be a penguin if I tried really hard. I mean, I'm fairly decent at role play. I can role play a penguin.
Don't tempt me to encourage it now, because I'll be like, right, let's see your penguin walk. So what one do you want to share first? Because we kind of we tried to structure this, didn't we? And then we went fast and loose with it.
I thought maybe when you were talking about like the animals in the more traditional sense, I was thinking about this one, the Anima Mundy.
Yeah.
Because I feel like this one has a little bit more of like, it's very pippish. Actually, this is not, I forgot, this is not all animals.
No.
It's mostly animals. So one of the things that I really like about this deck is, oh, shiny. Maybe there are animals like this, although it doesn't seem like at first glance, there's squirrels, right? There's
squirrels and woodpeckers.
And a woodpecker. Okay, so here's one, the octopus for the hermit. Like, I think that's not something I would think about for the hermit. Like, if I'm just thinking of animals, which is, I think, really cool. We do have plants. There's a few plants in here. This dude right here, when I first got this deck, I'm going to tell you a little story. When I first got this deck, my youngest and I were looking through it, and we were like, what the hell kind of a bird is that? We have never seen anything like that. So we went on a hunt to find this bird, and then we went down a rabbit hole of actually learning more about this bird and all of that. I think it's a harpy eagle. We went on a whole thing trying to figure out what bird that was. And that was a really like interesting moment where, so for that example, I did want to know. I was like, what is going on? Because my youngest loves birds, and we were like trying to figure out what this giant bird is. I can't find it. Yeah, harpy eagle. Okay, I thought so. Anyway, but we were fascinated by this bird on this card, and we went down a whole rabbit hole, and we were like looking it up, watching videos. Like it went on for like an hour or two that we were exploring this idea of the harpy eagle, like the Queen of Cups as the humpback whale. Like, yeah, I'm a sucker for anything with whales, penguins.
Oh, there they are.
There they are. I was trying to find. Okay, so this is fairly static, right? It's just, is that an owl? It's some kind of an owl sitting in the branch, not really doing anything. So this one is an interesting blend, kind of trying to tie back to the like actual conversation here, of some of the cards feel active and some of the cards feel passive.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bit of a weird mishmash, that deck, for that.
It is. This one, this one sold me on the deck because it's an orca, and I was like, okay, it's got an orca, I have to have it. This is my second copy of this deck because the first one I trimmed and it looked great, and I rehomed it. I wanted it for whatever reason with the borders back. Okay, here's traditional. This is what I was thinking of. So snake, death. So some of these cards are very, like, as you were talking about, like the animal that you would think of if I say that card. There's a few of them in here that really hit, like the magician.
Yeah.
High priestess. Some of these are like, I don't say like on the nose, but like on the nose.
Yeah, I feel like that's fair.
but for me, the hangman's a spider in this one, which also works. But for me, some of that, like having that kind of bit be on the nose is like, okay, I get it. Like even
because it's helpful.
Even layman me can figure out what that, what that card means. This is my favorite card in the deck though, because the person is the devil. This is, I think, one of the selling points of this deck because it really hones in with that. The single human figure being the devil in this deck is amazing. I love that.
Yeah, that's some deep commentary there.
It's some deep commentary. Yes, which I absolutely love. I'm like, that is so on point. I love it. Especially in a deck populated with animals, right? Yeah. What's the biggest threat to animals? People.
Which is interesting because obviously we're still technically animals as well. So it like works twofold because it's like we should include ourselves, but we've separated ourselves in such a an almighty way. And then, like you say, we're like the biggest threat to them. So good for the devil card, which actually I don't think that she talks about too much in the book. I mean, the guidebook's quite short anyway, but that's one of those key points where I feel like a lot of people can come up with a huge story about it quite quickly. That's what I was going to say. One of the points you've hit on for me, which is if we're going to talk about like how to make an animal deck work for people with it already being so non-traditional in terms of it not being people, on the nose animals, not a bad thing. As you said, actually really, really helpful. Of course, are you going to get 78 on the nose? Probably not, but the more that you can get that, and I think that's why things like the hermit crab on the hermit, it's in the name, or perhaps the octopus instead of for the hermit for like the 7 of Cups, because if people are thinking of more of like a Rider-Waite-Smith deck at least, it almost got this idea of like all these different decisions, or you could have it on an 8 card.
I was gonna say, I feel like I've seen it on a 7 of Cups somewhere. Some deck has it on the 7 of Cups, and I always wonder why is that not the 8?
That's why
every time, because I'm like, it's got 8 legs. It should be on an 8 card.
Which is so funny, right? Because we don't expect to see only 4-legged animals on 4s.
I know. And it has nothing to do with, I was trying to think like what 8 it would even work with. I mean, you could do it for the 8 of Wands because octopus are really fast, right?
Yeah.
They're like, they can make those legs like move. They're really fast.
Very.
So you could definitely do that. I mean, I could probably make a case for each of them. Like if I really thought hard about it, is that tarot's completely subjective, right? I could sit here and make a case for the octopus as any 8 in the deck. I could also make a case for it as strength.
Yeah, definitely, because that's what.
Or as justice.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. But because of that, and I think that's because when it comes to knowing about an animal, what do I know about an octopus? Very little. It's got 8 legs. That's the first thing I'm going to tell you. So the number 8 is like the first thing that the first connection that I have with octopus.
Which is really so interesting, because then I feel like there are other animals that have got like set numbers of things, but of course their key sort of collective view is so different that I think, like, if you got spiders, that yeah,
thumbs up. Yeah.
Apparently my computer's agreeing with me.
I love that.
I don't know how to turn that off.
That's okay. It just reminded everybody, give the video a thumbs up, right? Like and subscribe, do all that stuff.
Yeah, do all the things.
Do all the things. Tegan's computer said so.
Yeah, it's becoming sentient, so be careful. I feel like if I said spider, people would put it on a swords card, like a fear-based card, mental fear.
Yeah, I could see that. I see spiders. To me, when I think of spider, I think of webs. And so then I think of like connectivity and creativity, and that makes me think of like more of like the world card. I could probably make a case. I can make a case for it for any of them. Like it just this is the thing about tarot, though, right?
But also, it's the interesting thing about animals, because as I talk to you, what I realize is if you made your own animal deck, they're not your special interest, this, that, and the other, but you could make an animal deck that works for you based on just that alone, which is so interesting. And I think that's part of the discussion, is that because perhaps people are more familiar to us, whether we like it or not, having animal decks, I wonder if one of the reasons they don't work for people is just that. It's like, well, this is just not where my brain goes. Like it's too specialist interest. It's too specific. Whereas, as you say, you could put the octopus on an 8 just because of the 8 stuff, and put the spider on the world, and, you know, you'd be having a grand time.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, because you don't really have that layer with people, right? I don't look at people and go, you know, this is a defining characteristic of you if it's a stranger, right? But we totally do that with animals, you know,
all the time.
A horse, and I'm like, this is what this means, and, you know, or plants or whatever.
In that sense, animals allow us to enjoy our projections and our assumptions and our judgments a lot more. And we probably do it with people to a point, but some of us probably try to be more mindful of it because our assumptions aren't necessarily true at all, and some people are just probably quiet about it because they wouldn't want to admit that. I feel like some part of it we're like societally conditioned for as well, though, because when I was growing up, it was like back in the day you could only have one genre, and one of the reasons why I didn't fit was because people wanted to know, you know, were you a goth, were you a grunger, you know, were you preppy, were you this, that, and the other, and it was like being a blend was too difficult for people. So but I feel like animals, they get the brunt of that, and it's not necessarily always a bad thing, but it is, it sort of is and it isn't, right? Because if I said what animals are in scary movies a lot versus what animals are, you know, the friendly companions, they tend to be very typecast.
Yeah, that's true.
And yet those decks that typecast the animals, so that on the nose ones, that's, I feel like, why they're easier, because it makes sense.
It taps into like that collective knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Like, we've all seen Jaws. We all know sharks are scary, right?
Yeah, it would be a big shark, a great white jumping out of the water, all gnashes showing, is probably not the first thing that someone's going to put on an Empress card. Now, could we make an argument for it? Hell yes.
Sure, we could.
Is it likely to ever show up on an Empress card?
I mean, we could make that happen.
We could really mess with people, but it wouldn't be an easy deck to use.
No, it wouldn't. You'd have to like take a trip into our brain, and sometimes it's interesting in here. We entertain each other, but you know,
you could get lost in there for a while.
We speak from experience.
So people are going to have to do the sad, oh, we can't get this deck. But it feels pretty iconic, right, for animal decks.
Absolutely. If you were to say what's the most like famous animal deck, that's the one that I would mention.
Yeah. And Ted Andrews is pretty iconic in animal spiritual stuff. I would still, because I'm me, encourage people to go through a more behavioural specialist, zoologist, natural observer as well, the science side of things. But I do feel that of his time, he really did try and merge the two, and he did go and study animals and stuff. He's not without his faults. I think that this is such an iconic animal deck that I have to assume that so many animal decks are inspired by this and the Medicine Cards Oracle as an oracle, because I see a lot of similar information being repeated in other decks from this one. And I think this one is a very good example of what you were saying about stillness. And of course, storytelling is kind of slim because it's very close-up portrait photography.
Yeah, it's real animals, which to me makes a huge difference.
His sort of slant on tarot is just a little bit more uplifting, and because it goes down the animal train, which is a mix of like animal magic, folklore, spiritual, connections across cultures, and then behavioral stuff. It's so non-traditional by that point that some of the meanings in particular are so far gone that I feel like it wouldn't be the easiest deck for people to use. Yet it is so iconic of its time because it did try and merge all of those worlds together and does it successfully, I feel like. But yeah, if I just said like there's a caterpillar picture, I'm assuming it could just be anything, right?
Yeah. That deck, I've looked at that deck many times. Like I've watched videos, I've done like some research on it. And okay, besides the fact that the photography is just not great, and the design, the layout of that deck, like it makes my designer heart hurt. It's so bad. It's so bad. I just can't even. It's a hot mess. But
and the backs.
In the back, like the whole thing is just a hot mess of a deck. Granted, it's a very old deck, so there's that. But I do know that like if I was going to want to learn more about animals and work with an animal deck in more of the behavioral sense, I would go to a deck like that because of the photographs, because of Ted Andrews, wealth of knowledge and all of that. But every time I look at it, I'm like, it doesn't, I don't get it. That would be a lot of work. I don't want to do it. I want somebody to hold my hand, and that deck's not going to do that.
It does have a little key phrase, I think is the best term for them. But I feel they're very non-traditional as well. So we've got the 5 of Pentacles here with Mouse for examining life's lessons.
Yeah. See, that was the other part of it. I'm like, I don't get it.
Yeah. You're like, huh?
I mean, I get it. Like I could, like anything, right? If I sat and thought about it, I could make the connection and make the case for it. But am I gonna? Probably not.
Mice, because they're little and they fiddle around and scurry around and look at all the small things, we've associated them with looking at the small details and having a lot of scrutiny, and because they're prey awareness. Then trying to pull it into the 5 of Pentacles in whatever system you're using, the contraction of having like physical challenges or a lack of resources or something like that. And then you've got to try and pull that back into examining life's lessons.
Right.
And for me, it would be one of the best non-traditional animal decks in that I don't feel like it follows a traditional system closely at all. And I would highly recommend it because of all of that valuable knowledge. If it was accessible and bloody reprinted again.
Yeah,
but
there is that.
Would it be an easy one to read with? I'm not so sure. And I feel like sometimes that people love love the creator or the work so much that it gets overshadowed, or somehow like people are like, well, we can't say that because his body of work is amazing.
I feel like that to me feels like an advanced animal deck.
I agree. And I think that the keywords make it seem like it wouldn't be.
Yeah. But the keywords don't make any sense.
Yeah.
I mean, they do, but
some of them are a bit better than others. But so 6 of Wands, faith and efforts rewarded. The language is older, but I feel like we've got that celebratory
sort of victory.
Yeah. Whereas 10 of Pentacles, home, birth, and primal mother. Huh?
Okay.
Yeah. It's so non-traditional, right?
It's so non-traditional. And
then we get into the areas of what he shares that's collective versus where he gets into like more cultural references, and then whose cultures they are. But I felt like this was a really good example of, firstly, something that I feel like, I don't know if started a trend is right, but made a wave, is significant, takes a big space for me in tarot history, and is a great example of a non-traditional animal deck in all of the ways, because as well, photography on a tarot deck, obviously it wasn't a thing because photography is modern.
Right. That deck hits all the marks for non-traditional.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, absolutely all of them.
And so not one that you feel like you would work with well at all, I'm assuming.
No, I mean, I've looked at it many, many, many times, and I'm just like, even if it was like mass market and readily available, I can almost guarantee that I would get it. I would look at it and I would go, yeah, no, this is too overwhelming. Because the thing is when you take something new like that, so new for me, working with animals, working with real animals, and then you add all of that other layer to it, that deck is just so overwhelming. I feel like I would need to create like a whole dedicated study just for that deck. And, I'm probably not going to do that. I mean, I'm just probably not. But it's not just it's got, in terms of the challenges of that deck, maybe because it is so non-traditional, it's got all the challenges for me. Like if I would say, what would be the one deck that you would have the hardest time using out of all the tarot in all the world, it would probably be that one, because it's got all the things in it that I personally find challenging.
Yeah.
Animals, bad design, real photography, just like everything.
So over to you. What deck do you want to talk about next?
Okay. Well, let's talk about the animal deck that works really well for me then.
Yes.
How's that? Okay. So I have the Northern Animal Tarot.
This is
I have
modded.
I've modded mine just like, so like I re-rounded the edges and made them corner. I don't think you can tell on camera, but this deck is an example of animals that work for me, because this deck for me feels like stepping into a storybook. But basically it's animals in place of people. Like it's literally just animal heads, right? For the most part. I mean, they've got little animal hands and feet, but like it's just animal heads on people-y bodies. And like, I get it. This makes sense to me. But also this is another like huge comfort deck for me, because this reminds me of, storybooks from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so whenever I get this deck out, like this is a great one for storytelling, because I feel like I can lay a few of these cards down and I like can tell myself a bedtime story with these. So like, there's this little empress and she's walking through the forest, and then she meets the moose and what is that on there? A skunk. And then they come across this bear and he's like going on a journey, and now it's nighttime. They spent the whole day together, and now they're going to take these cups and they're going to go, and then they're going to come across this rabbit. Like you could just keep going with this deck. And that is one of the things that I really love about it. I think the illustration style is like really charming and comforting. This was, I think, the first animal deck, though, that I ever got that I was like, oh, wait, I really like the animals in this deck. Now, granted, I would say that I probably, like if I had to put this against the Heartwood, the Heartwood's probably gonna win.
Oh, okay.
But just slightly, because for me, they have very, very different energies. So this is an interesting conversation. I can see myself in the Heartwood as the little mouse, right? And I can make that personal connection. This, I don't see myself in this deck.
Yeah.
I see this as like, whereas the Heartwood to me is like, if I were writing a story, it would be first person narrative. And if I were writing a story using this, it would be third person. So I don't see myself in this deck, but I love telling stories with this deck.
I can totally see that though, actually, that you don't see yourself in that one and why.
Yeah. But also, like, do the animals really matter? I don't think they do.
I'm looking at them, and again, I'm sure I could make a case for all of them, but no.
Yeah, you could, but I don't know that there's any, like, specific, like, this little fox dude or fox people, there's several of them in this deck.
Yeah.
Right? And there's several bird people, and there's several squirrel people. Like, we've seen several squirrels. So I don't think the animals matter. I don't think there's any inherent meaning in the animal itself. To me, this is a great example of taking a traditional Rider-Waite-Smith deck and replacing the people with animals.
Yes, which makes it non-traditional, but it's one of the most traditional.
It's the most traditional of the non-traditional, yeah.
Yeah.
But like, and also, man, I've got the first edition, and this feels like a book in my hand. I know they changed the cardstock, but like, it just like, it sounds like a book. It feels like a book. I love it.
Did you ever read like or watch Wind in the Willow?
Yeah, Wind in the Willow. It's got Wind in the Willows vibes for me for sure.
So
yeah,
like that's again that sweet spot where I feel like if anyone has familiarity of that kind of anthropomorphized animal in childhood, that level of sort of animal meets fantasy, it's a really good introduction into replacing humans again, because like you say, it doesn't really matter what animal
I don't think it matters. Yeah.
And that's one of the conversations I love having with people. It is an animal deck, but it's not, to me, it's not an animal gnosis, as in I'm not seeking all of the hidden layers of knowledge, whether they are behavioral, scientific, or folkloric or whatever. And it doesn't mean that she didn't put those in there. Like, I honestly have zero idea. All I know is it's cute and it's on my wish list.
That deck has like all the little additional notes to it that help, you know, create a connection to it in that way. But it's very approachable for me, like, because it's just replacing the people basically. And I don't have to know anything about the animals, and I can just go, look, they're so cute. But it's still the same basic Rider-Waite-Smith, right?
Yeah. And I'm wondering as well, and I guess it's also an audience question, participation, as much as it might be for you, because it might not be relevant for you. But one of the things that I hear people talk about a lot with animal decks is that there is some quite confronting imagery in some of the very scenic cards, and people seem to be a lot more accepting of that with humans. When we start talking about dead animals, whether that's naturally deceased, whether it might be a baby animal or an animal that's been pierced with swords, a lot of people start having a lot more feelings about that. And I'm wondering if that fantasy element still sort of adds that layer of removal, so it still falls into more of that people-y storytelling without it becoming very real animals are wounded.
Yeah, I think so, because if you look at, like, I was just thinking of the Anima Mundy 10 of Swords, if I can find it really quickly. So I feel like this 10 of Swords and the Anima Mundy, like, this is a hard one, because it's like, it's a little birdie, and there is definitely blood, and I had to check. There's definitely blood and all that, and there's no doubt this little birdie is dead now, right?
Yeah.
But this one is, there's no blood. It's the same card. It's the same imagery. If I can find my camera, it's the same imagery, right? But this feels like this is so much more challenging than this. And even if I were to pull out like a Rider-Waite-Smith with a person, I don't care, that's fine, whatever, it's just a person, right? But don't stab the birdie. You can't stab the birdie. What did the birdie ever do to you? People do crap all the time. But the birdie, no, you can't stab the birdie. So yeah, it's an interesting thing because the more challenging cards, if they are depicted in this way where it's animals, I mean, I don't have a problem with it. It's not like I'm going to not work with the deck because of it. But this is a more challenging imagery to work with than this one.
Yeah,
for sure.
And that's why I was curious. The penguin card in the Anima Mundy is probably the saddest card in the whole deck.
Oh, yeah. Here it is.
It is unfortunately deceased.
Yeah.
And I know that has been a point for people with Anima Mundy, with one of the decks that I'm going to show, which is the Brady. People didn't like it in the Wild Unknown Tarot with the... I think it might be a bison or something like that with the 10 swords through it. And I actually haven't heard it said about any anthropomorphic fantasy animal decks ever. It's only ever the ones that veer far more towards the side of more realistic.
Yeah. I think that's a big distinction between the two, because I feel like I could be walking around in the world and see that, but I'm probably not going to see a fox dressed up in a cape laying in a forest somewhere. I would love to, but it's probably not going to happen.
It's a lot more Robin Hood Disney, isn't it?
A little Robin Hood, yeah. So that's interesting, because I feel like there is the potential for there to be, even though we were talking about sometimes approaching animal decks is easier because they're less people-y, but I think because we have that, most people have that tie into animals of like, for most of us, we're like, oh, we have to protect the animals, right? Because like we know what we're doing, and so we're like, oh, protect the animals, so we don't want to see them in those kind of situations, and I think that's harder to deal with. For me personally, I do like that there are some animal decks that are confronting, like, because you're talking about like the Brady Tarot. Lisa calls the Brady Tarot her National Geographic deck, and I like fully 100% agree with that. And if I'm coming to that deck, I want that. I want the realistic, because that deck is interesting because I do have it. It is very much an animal deck, but it also works for me. Like I can work with that one, and I think it's because my perspective is different coming into that one.
That's interesting. Carry on, do tell. We'll move on to this one.
Like I come to that one and I'm expecting like to see the harsher side, because as much as we like to like glorify animals as cute, cuddly, like nature is brutal.
Yeah.
And that deck reminds me that like nature is brutal, but we are a part of nature too. So like we're brutal right along with it all. And it's such an interesting take on it. And that's how I kind of approach it. Like that deck for me is great, even though it's animals, for when I want to get to like what is really going on. Like what's the unbiased truth in this situation? Because I feel like that deck does a really good job of like stripping away all the ego human BS.
Yeah.
And like
it's confronting, isn't it?
It's confronting. And I appreciate that about it. Like if I go to the Brady, I know I'm going to be confronted, but that's why I'm using it, right? Because there's something I need to be confronted about.
So it's like an excavation deck for you then.
Yeah.
And the reason I stopped on this card is because if you see Hummingbird on like a zillion other decks, it's often associated with joy. And there's a big joy, happiness association with hummingbirds across the board. And actually they're right, but territorial.
They're really brutal to each other, right?
They're really super territorial. And so this is another deck that not only are we serving up obviously non-traditional without repeating ourselves for animal. Emmy Brady was like, I'm not doing that. You can see conflict with the hummingbirds and this like fantastic cactus that's like flowering as well, which just adds a whole nother layer to it. And it just hits so many points, this one in particular, where it stands out and it does things differently. I feel like the keywords are almost non-traditional as well, especially things like I'm not going to think of them now, but altruism And I'm like, they really go there with some of the keywords in terms of sort of like Lisa calling it like the National Geographic. I think it stands up to that as a like, I think that's a compliment as well. It does it really well, because in the book you've obviously got the very divinatory layer that Rachel Pollock, I assume that was a lot of her, and then I'm assuming the behavioural bit is the bit that perhaps Emmy sort of brought to it when she was creating them, and we get that really nice mishmash of both in a very clear-cut way, in a very no-nonsense, here's what's going on, here's what you're seeing. If there is any cultural sort of iconography, symbols, you know, things that are relevant to the area, like the arrowheads and stuff, it's all briefly discussed, you're put in the loop, and then you get a divinatory message as well, which I feel like the divinatory message is perhaps in this one, yes, you might have to rely on the guidebook to sort of start to retain what it means. But I feel like it does a good job of helping people bring it back to tarot. I know that keywords aren't for everyone. Keywords they're pretty non-traditional, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Well, I mean, in a sense, there's sort of titles on the 𝗨 and there's keywords on the 𝗨. When I see keywords, it used to be that was like a clear sign that it's a 𝗨-based deck, but that's not the case anymore.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, there is something non-traditional about that as well. And again, it's something of a point of contention for some people, because some people didn't want it because it had keywords on, which is totally understandable. That's, you know.
The keyword can be really limiting, just in a general sense. Not on that deck in particular, but just having a deck with a single keyword on it can be very, very limiting and very put you in a box.
I love that you still have this, and this has somehow managed to win a little slot of your collection, despite being perhaps a lot more closer to Animal Wise. But I'm assuming this doesn't make your designer brain unhappy.
It doesn't. It's beautiful. It's everything about it. I feel like it does. I was trying to think of a nice way to say it, but it does what the Animal Wise, what it was lacking.
Yeah.
It picked up all of those pieces. And I still feel like with that deck, if I want to know more about the animal itself and the behavioral aspects of the animal, that's in there. If I want to focus more on the divinatory, that's in there. But also, in case for keywords, because it has a keyword, I don't have to touch the guidebook if I don't want to.
Yeah.
So that deck for me is like a great sort of all-arounder animal deck, because it slots in however I want to work with it.
Yeah.
Like however deep I want to go, or do I want to go into more of the divinatory? Do I want to go more into the animal? Because sometimes I do. Sometimes I'll catch like a card. I'm like, oh, that animal's really interesting. Well, I wonder why they chose that animal or whatever. And I'll get into the guidebook and look and things like that. But not always. It depends on what I'm reading about, the context of my reading.
So it feels more like a choice than you're forced to.
Yeah.
Different.
And I think that's the difference. That's a big defining thing for me with text, just decks in general, but particularly with things that I struggle with, like animal decks, plant decks, or the same thing with plant decks. I don't want to be forced to have to rely on a guidebook or outside sources in order to work with it. But I love when it's there if I want to. So that I feel like that deck really hits that middle ground, because if I wanted to, if a card came up, I could get into the guidebook, look at the behavioral aspects of the animal. And if I wanted to, I could then continue my work and research into that, right? Usually for me, because like I have to be hit upside the head with it like 900 times before I get it. Like that's what happened with Butterfly, and then last year Bee, and things like that. So I'm the wrong person to be saying this, but I feel if you want to work with animals in a more concrete way, that would be a good one to kind of like ease you into it. I actually got that deck to work with Animal Gnosis.
Oh, really?
Originally, yeah.
Awesome. I think you're the perfect person to say that. Because yes, I do it all the time, and there are ways that I can talk about it over years of experience. I feel like I'm pretty good at being able to put myself in a beginner mindset. I still don't think it's the same. I knew so much about animals before I even knew enough about tarot, that it's such a ridiculous advantage that it's hard for me to conceive Like, it's so theory based when I talk about that experience. So for you to say, oh, I struggle with animal decks, and actually I think that that's a go-to, is I think that's more solid, if honestly, because it's like, well, what animal deck am I going to be impressed with? The one that teaches people to learn tarot and animals in a way that feels natural and can do all of the things, or someone has to know all the shit before they come to it.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't disagree in any way, shape, or form. I would say it's not a shame it hasn't been mass market, in that I'm all for people staying indie. It's a shame in that obviously it makes it a little bit less accessible, because I do think it's one of the most successful animal decks out there. And considering it's not my native fauna or flora, or just like nowhere near, there's so many animals in here that, yes, I'm familiar with because it's me, but they're not native to me at all. And yet it hits all of the points for me. It does the difficult, challenging bits. They're still in there. It's very real. It's very raw. And one of the things for me that I love about this is that there's some cards that have got more than one animal. And instead of it then being that neither of them are important, or the only one is and the other's just sort of in there, everything is consciously included. Everything has a specific reason why it's in there, and also it's mentioned really briefly, which I would happily have a book that rambled on for 5 days, but for people who want some kind of ease and retention, it's not a long book, is it? But it's like, it's quality.
It's digestible, but it's quality.
And so and the art style in particular,
beautiful. The production value is like, it checks all the boxes. It checks all the boxes.
It really does. If I can somehow at some point get a hold of there's a Traveller's Edition coming out. I'm told the Traveller's Edition is going to be a linen cardstock and a bit smaller. And I'm like, oh, please come to the UK.
Yeah. I was going to say, the only thing about that deck is it's hard for me to shuffle because it's so big.
Yeah. And especially this second edition, which is what I'm showing if people are curious, it's quite a bit larger than the first edition. It's not standard tarot size. It's non-traditional in its sizing as well, basically. Sure. Only a bit, but with the heavy 400 GSM.
It's a big, chunky, heavy deck.
Yeah. Let's put it this way. If I wasn't absolutely infatuated with it, it would not get anywhere near as much use because it hurts my hands. But it's like, the Animal Wise is one of my favourite all-time animal decks for a very different reason. And it feels like a love letter of Ted Andrews. But the Brady Tarot is like, those two are pinnacle animal deck. Heaven for me. Over to you, my love.
Oh, well, let's just rock the boat and talk about ridiculous. Let's follow the Brady up with the Curious Creatures.
Why not? Let's palette cleanse for people.
Palette cleanse. So okay, this deck, I'm gonna be honest. Well, I edged mine, but I'm gonna be honest. The first time I saw this deck come out, I was like, that's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. I'm never getting this deck. I mean, what the hell? What is up with this? This is the weirdest freaking deck. This is Lisa made me do it.
Excellent.
And she was like, it's so much fun. This to me, I think, is almost like, it almost makes fun of, that sounds like mean and malicious, and I don't mean it in that. It plays with, that's a better way to put it. It plays with the idea of the anthropomorphized animal. It's very modern in that sense. The collaging in it is actually really well done.
It looks really clean.
It's very clean. It's very, very well done collaging, which is not something that you can often say about a collage decks. I have very few collage decks in my collection, and I have a ton of them that I would say are examples of really good collage. This is definitely one of them. It is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
I love that.
But it's so much fun in its ridiculousness. But also, this is an animal deck that is easy for me to work with. And this is an interesting one because I feel like the animal actually does kind of a little bit matter.
I was looking at them and thinking the animals are a lot more making connections.
Like, look at this, the llama with the Hierophant. I mean, like, if you get too close to it, it's going to spit on you, right?
It's spitting truths.
It's spitting truths. Like, I feel like this one, even though it's this ridiculous, I feel like the animals matter.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. It's so much fun. It's so fun. It's such a silly, goofy little deck. I mean,
look. And they're real human bodies, aren't they? This is just really well done collage.
They're human bodies. I love this Four of Swords.
Excellent.
But the thing with they are human bodies, but she has done an excellent job of making sure that like hands and feet and extra, they look like they belong. Yeah. She's done a really, like, here's a good example. She's done a really good job of this.
She is a solid collager though, because whilst I don't have it anymore, I have to say, like, the Muse Tarot.
The Muse, yeah. I don't have it anymore either, but it's beautifully done. Yeah. So this one is just, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Oh,
it's so ridiculous.
So it's an ostrich and an ostrich egg.
And it's an ostrich egg.
Still.
It's very thoughtful. And that's the thing that I realized. This deck, I think, is a little bit like what you see on the surface is one thing. But if you really get into it, and it is anthropomorphized, but unlike the northern animal, I feel like the animals do matter in this deck. I love this, the Five of Swords. Like, it's just, this is like a feel good, I like have fun kind of a deck.
Yeah.
But the thing that surprised me about this one is that there is depth here. It's not just silliness for the sake of silliness. And this is one of those great examples of decks that like remind me not to take things too seriously.
Yeah.
I paired this with the Housewives and the Zombie Tarot and did a reading with the three of them together. I think I did a video of it on my channel, but I was doing that for a while when like life was like, I think it was around the pandemic time, life was real challenging. Yeah. And I was like, I just need some fun and play. And this is a great deck for that.
I'm not mentally like, I've just put it on my wish list.
It's really cute. It's mass market. It's really cute. It's really fun and playful, and like but there's depth there. And I think that's really appreciated, because especially for me nowadays, because like there's so much depth in the idea of play for me.
Yes.
And that's something that I'm exploring. And that deck is a wonderful example of how play can actually have depth and significance, and there can be work done in the play. Like play or work, growth work doesn't have to be super serious all the time. It doesn't have to be like challenging. You can take those things and still do those things, but in a more playful, fun and creative and expressive way. And that deck actually kind of embodies that idea, which is really cool.
I really love that. And I am definitely on the same train as you with that. Play is therapeutic. And there are so many art therapies, play therapies, animal therapy. There are so many therapies that aren't solely based on the one-to-one talk and even somatic layers that bring other outside stuff in. And also, even when working with like younger people, far more a route into healing and even opening up about something when it's creative and versatile and familiar and safe and enjoyable. I don't understand why it hasn't been sort of, I guess, ironically, I'm going to be, I say, taken more seriously, but the lack of seriousness hasn't been taken more seriously and like encouraged, because these expressions, they still mean stuff. We weave meaning into literally everything we do and touch. So it makes so much sense to me. And what I love about that one is that it clearly has impressed you. Like, that's very evident about the way that you talk about it. You're like, it is impressive.
It's an impressive deck. I was surprised when I got it. I only got it because Lisa told me to. So sometimes I do what I'm told, not often, but sometimes I do what I'm told. But anyway, she's like, you'll like it. And it did impress me because I wasn't expecting. It's like that 𝗵𝗂𝗃 tarot that I talk about from time to time. It's not an animal deck, but on the surface it looks like one thing, but underneath there's so much more going on.
The way that you've spoken about it, I feel very experimental in tarot animal world. And I like to push myself outside of like my comforts or norms or whatever. And when I first came into it, I wanted to see what decks expressed the 𝗵𝗂𝗃 the best and all of the other things. And now I've got a lot more time and space for, okay, well, what other animal decks?
I would love to see you do a walkthrough, a video of the curious creatures, because I think, and I don't have a lot of animal knowledge, but I think there's a layer there that I am probably not exploring. And it's a subtle layer. I think it's there.
We may just have to. I may just have to get it and do like some nerd
just try it.
First impression.
Oh, it would. I mean, I will 100% watch it. But I just want to see it. I mean, sometimes we do make videos for just one person. It happens.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. As long as it brings us joy as well. I've totally made videos for one person.
Same. So. Yep. Absolutely.
I've got one more deck left. The reason that this one is included was very much because it was mass market as well. And it's more of, I guess, from the mass market ones, or one that you've shown, this is more of, I guess, a more animal gnosis, animal behavioural, animal deck type. And this is the Animal Totem Tarot. Dawn asked, what one do I recommend that's mass market?
Easy to get a hold of,
Yeah, and that I think is, if you can't get the Brady Tarot, if you can't get, the Animal Wise, what would I recommend? And it's the Animal Totem Tarot. There are some caveats with it, but they are, of course, with every recommendation, very subjective. Over the years, and bringing more of a discerning eye to the guidebook, I feel that there are some points in the guidebook that are really strong. The guidebook does a thing where it talks about the animal speaking directly, divinatory message really, and then there's another divinatory message. But also then it's broken down into some of the traditional reasons that people tend to come to tarot. So it's like business, there's a health, I can't remember if it's health and relationships or they're two separate, but there's like 3 breakdowns of areas in life where they try and nuance the tarot message more into, okay, Ace of Cups, but in a relationship, Ace of Cups, but if it was in business and professional life. And I think that can be quite a handy tool for people. The animals are all named very well, and there's a really nice array of animals, from more recognizable ones like the pig to some others. There's like reindeers on the judgment card, but they're Santa reindeers. Like there's a sled still. I feel like this one does a good job of attempting some expression of what's going on. So it's not just a picture of a fox. We see the fox jumping in the air. Now, depending on how much you know about foxes, or if you read the guidebook, still then depends on how much you get from that.
Right.
But I feel like there's an attempt at it. The grasshopper is on the move.
It's an active deck.
Yeah, I don't think it's the most active. It's not storytelling to the same quality of
Heartwood. Yeah.
But the fact that the High Priestess still has the moon in it, I think that's great. The 8 of Wands with a horse is clearly running, but there's still also some spears or javelins or whatever they are. The 5 of Wands, we've got snarling going on, and clearly there. So I feel like it's way more active than some others, but the guidebook, in my opinion, is hit and miss. I try and be delicate because, someone's written it, and obviously it's not all for me either, but some of it doesn't feel very relevant to what I know of the tarot, whether it's Rider-Waite-Smith or numerology or whatever it is. And some of the animal stuff is a little bit spiritual and woo outside of anything that I would consider like relevant. And then other cards, this is a great way of breaking down this and helping people see it in the tarot. So my short summary of the guidebook is that is hit and miss, in my humble opinion. But again, like this lemur sitting out in the sun in like a basking pose, I feel like it's trying to tell us. Obviously, here we can see that one of them is, I mean, more than wounded. We've got bones sticking out there. You are going to see impaled animals in this one. But I feel like this one hits the sweet spot of the style of it is still sort of not quite natural history, but it's really detailed. It's very real, true to life looking animals to me. It doesn't veer too outside of like, there are still swords, there are still cups. It tries to bring people into the animal bit, and it still tries to tell a story. It's not too still. It's not too passive.
Seems like a really good blend of all the things.
Yes.
And it like in a general sense, you know, just kind of like that. I was going to say like a middle of the road deck. I don't mean that in a, I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but like middle of the road. Like if I was new to animals, new to tarot, or new to working with animals in tarot, that would probably be, I had that deck at one point because it had orcas on the chariot card, and I just thought that was amazing and I had to buy it. I ended up rehoming it because I didn't use it very often because I had other animal decks that personally fit the bill for me. But I feel like that's a good to get started on like an animal journey if you're just trying it for the first time.
Do you feel like a fair amount of the artwork then is a little bit more readable to you than, say, perhaps the Animal Wise?
Oh, for sure. Because it's illustrated, it's got a little bit of a storybook quality to it. But it's also, they're not anthropomorphized. So I feel like I'm looking at like real animals, but it's like watching real animals on TV versus like going to the zoo. I'm trying to think of a good, like, it's a step removed, right? It's a step removed because it's illustrated and not photography. It feels like an animal deck to me. It doesn't feel like a storybook deck like the Northern Animal or the Heartwood. It doesn't feel like, it's definitely not anthropomorphized, but it's also not as National Geographic as like Brady is. So it kind of is like that sweet spot in between all the things.
And so that's why I feel like it's a really solid contender. I'll be honest. I recommended this one less and less after seeing some of the guidebook entries because I've never had to rely on the guidebook. I have since read it cover to cover, and after a friend had said to me, "Have you read this one?" And I was like, not so much for me, not hitting at all. And so I always get a bit wary of the recommendation thing because I fear that people think a recommendation is like just a glowing perfection. And that's never, I'm always able to critique. But actually for me, this is one of my most used animal decks because I had it for a really long time. I was gifted it by an old friend in the tarot community, and they was like, I just think you're going to love this way more than me. And I do. Like, I actually should probably get a backup copy of it just in case, because I've taken it outdoors loads. And it feels very fitting for reading outdoors. It's just all of the sweet spots in one for me. And so whilst it isn't a like-for-like replacement of the Brady,
right?
I don't think that any deck's going to like-for-like another. I still would happily recommend this because I think it will try and help people bring the two worlds together. But actually now I think that anthropomorphic is probably the closest to being like an easy transition.
Yeah, I think anything that is a hybrid of people and animals, right? I think it's the blending. It's like the stepping stone into it. And also you can totally lean into one or the other. So if you're trying to find your way with it and try to find where you're comfortable, it's like the Northern Animal, I probably read that more like it would be a people-y deck. Than say like the Brady Tarot for sure. I mean, the Brady is not anthropomorphized, but I would work with the cards differently. I would read with them differently.
There's
and I do.
It's
a very different vibe. Even between like the Northern Animal and the Heartwood, those are both illustrated. They're both storybook, but they have very different feels. And the way that I approach them is very differently because while I don't necessarily approach the Heartwood as the animals in their behavioral or their gnosis sense, I do approach them more as real animals. It's a little mouse running around, or it's an actual snake, or it's an actual bird. Whereas with the northern animal, it's like, yeah, they're just like people wearing animal heads. I don't know. It's that feels less personal and more removed to me than the Heartwood does, because the real animals, in a weird sense, is actually easier for me in that deck to apply to my real life, because I see real animals. I do not see foxes walking around in cute little, suits and stuff. I would love to, but I don't get to see that.
I would love to.
I get to see it in video games, but
excellent. I totally get what you mean, because whilst I don't have one yet, like the northern animal, I read the Heartwood differently. There's a lot less, I guess, gnosis in more of the, when I say gnosis, not just the behavioral, but the folkloric and the magical and the cultural that's relevant to me, at least. There's a lot less of that goes into the Heartwood for me than the Brady. The Brady's a very heavy animal gnosis one for me in particular. So is the animal totem, so is the animal wise. The Heartwood is very observational, but again immersive. Like I'm sitting in a field with the animals wandering about me. We're having a shared experience. I don't think I've ever thought about much folklore, really. A couple of bits of like pop references for like the White Rabbit and the Magician, because the magician's hat, but really not too many references beyond that. So it is a very different vibe going in.
Something like the Heartwood for me is like the difference between like playing a video game versus watching a TV show about a video game. That's a really big thing nowadays, right?
Yeah.
So playing, let's take The Last of Us, because that's the big one right now. Playing The Last of Us is very different than watching The Last of Us, right? And some of those decks have that kind of feel to me. Like the Heartwood is like playing the game. Yeah. The Northern Animal is like watching the show about the game.
Yeah.
It's very different vibes. One is much more immersive than the other. I love them both, and they both have value and a place in my practice and in my collection, but they have very different experiences. Yeah. Even though they're both very storybook.
I love that. Because I chose the Heartwood instead of the 𝗗𝗄𝗰𝗀𝗀, one of the things I will say, just as I guess an add-on, but only in case anyone's watching and they're like, oh, you haven't given any extra like thoughts, or is that if someone wants to do some of the animal gnosis layers, but a different animal per every damn card is too difficult, there are decks, both mass market and indie, that group animals into the whole suit. And that's obviously what the 𝗗𝗄𝗰𝗀𝗀 does. And I feel like you get all of the suits and you can go, right, I need to know what a fox, represents in terms of the wands, what the squirrels represent in terms of the cups, and so on and so forth. And then you've just got the 22 majors after that. And I think that removes so much more legwork for people than some of the decks that I've chosen to show. Because these are, again, I think more complex. And so whilst I guess our gentle theming is non-traditional, we go in all different routes. And to me, it's like, I think the most complex ones are so different in comparison, whereas those other ones are a little bit easier to read with, I feel.
Yeah, I think so. I think that the 𝗗𝗄𝗰𝗀𝗀𝗀 is a really good kind of transition deck too, because it's very approachable, but it does stay within that sort of scenic, recognizable, sort of, Rider-Waite-Smith kind of energy. So I feel like it's a good one for that as well. I don't have any problem working with that deck. I've worked with it a lot. I prefer the Heartwood, but that's just because my own personal little connections to that deck now. But it's not like the 𝗗𝗄𝗰𝗀𝗀𝗀 is not a challenging deck for me to work with, because I can work with it in a very storybook way. And the animals are very familiar to me.
Yeah.
So there's nothing in that deck that I look at that and go, I don't like the heart. Now, granted, sometimes you go down a rabbit hole, because like the harpy eagle that Ash and I went down a whole rabbit hole because we were fascinated by that giant bird. There's something to be said for that too. But when you're looking at just working with, a deck that's for the first time and it's trying to be approachable into going into animal decks, I feel like the 𝗗𝗄𝗰𝗀𝗀𝗀 does a really good job of being very approachable in that way.
Yeah, I agree. And it does some of those, like, I guess, recognizable connections, like the same animals in the Lovers are the same ones in the Devil, and then you just see them in the different sort of composition or posture or whatever.
I think it's a good one for that too.
So have you any final thoughts before we wrap up our lengthy animal chat?
Well, I had more animal decks than I thought I did, which is kind of fun. I mean, granted, like there was one we were going to talk about and I can't find it. So, you know, but it's interesting. I don't think I really have sat and thought too much about, like, I know that animal decks have challenges for me, but clearly there's decks that help you find your way around those challenges. And I think like discussions like this are great because then it gives like people options for some of the decks that we've talked about. If that's a particular challenge, then maybe try this deck, you know, like the animal, was it Animal Wise, the Ted Andrews deck. That's just a no-go for me. But the Brady Tarot does something very similar, and that is a deck that I can work with and I can approach. And so it's interesting because I always say, well, animal decks aren't for me, but that's not entirely true.
Yeah.
Like I do like animal decks, and I didn't even think about the whole layer of when it's too much people-y. I do tend to go to, well, I go to my fandom fantasy decks a lot, but I do also tend to go to animal decks for that because there's no people.
And I think you and I are similar there. It's just that my go-tos first are the animal and nature, and then the gamey fantasy fandom.
Interesting follow-up to do fandoms next, because we're going to flip-flop, because fandom is my go-to first for that, and then it would be animals. So that'll be an interesting back-to-back. I mean, people have to wait a month, but you know.
We will definitely have to pull perhaps maybe even more of yours in and both talk about them, because I'm like, well, I've only got like 2, I think.
I've got us covered. We're good. I've got plenty.
It's not like I can't see them on the screen anyway. Thank you for indulging. I mean, I know it wasn't just my idea.
No, I would totally down to talk animal decks, because like it's fascinating to me. We'll have to try to probably tackle the plant deck thing at some point.
I think we should, because we're both out of that deck.
We're both it's like, hilarious. I don't know. That'll be an interesting one.
Yeah, in fact, I feel like what's something would I love to see more of on TarotTube is tarot readers who are really confident and have done a load of stuff talking about stuff they're not confident or comfortable with. Like, yeah, let's do that at some point.
Let's absolutely do that. Like, that's very non-traditional too, right? Let's come on. You know, public space and go, we have no idea what we're talking about, but come along for the ride.
Yeah, we're going to show up and we're going to stumble and we're going to be like, hey, we don't know how to do this.
Hey, those are some of my favorite videos to watch when people are like, I don't know, let's figure it out together. Absolutely. Let's figure it out together. I love that.
Well, I think that's us done for this round then, yeah?
Yep. I think we did good. We covered it.
We did. So I'm going to remind everyone that all of our links are in the bio, and especially Dawn, I like to put like lots of extras where you can find her here, there, and everywhere.
If I wasn't just all over the place, right? I got no focus. This is my brain.
I mean, no focus or just the most expansive reach ever, because I'm like, wow.
Maybe we should do an episode of Tarot Beyond Tradition as YouTubers.
Yes.
I don't know how we'd structure it, but I think it would be interesting, because neither one of us really have traditional tarot channels either.
No. So we don't structurally follow any one thing, do you?
Nope. That would be an interesting discussion. I guess maybe let us know in the comments if you want to see Tegan and I go down that rabbit hole.
Yes, and keep your requests and questions and all of the stuff coming, because we generally, if we can, we'll either make it into one of these or we just respond in the comments. Everyone's had us thinking and chatting, and I think they're some of the most chatty comment videos that I've had, actually. So and I come over and like look at yours and try and respond to a couple on yours as well. Yeah. So
it's great. I love the community conversation around it, which was really what we were kind of hoping to do. I mean, really, we just get together and talk and just hit the record button.
Yeah, like it's a 𝗵𝘁𝗿𝗀𝗀 bonus for us that people are involved, and that's lovely. But also we would probably do this even if we weren't recording.
Even if we weren't recording, yeah.
Well, with that said, then everyone knows where to check both of us out, and we will say bye for now and see people in a month and a half-ish, or whenever after this goes up.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.